This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Yes, he is. And we're talking about another one of the great success stories of professional wrestling today. It's Mankind. We're going to try to cover 96 and 97. There's so much meat on the bone. I don't know that we'll get to all of it, but if we don't, we will have a part two very, very soon. But we're covering him today because today, as people are hearing this on April 1st, is the 25-year anniversary of the debut of the Mankind character. The story of Mankind being in the WWF probably couldn't be told without Jim Ross. Fair to say?
Probably. Yeah, probably. His first 3 attempts to get hired were not successful. And that was a result of what was perceived by upper management as less than impressive dark matches, tryouts, whatever you want to say, whatever term you want to use. But when I got the job as head of talent relations, I really was interested in trying to create a different culture in the locker room. There were too many con men. There were too many, hey, brother, or what about my push? And you have the audacity of some guys to say, well, when I get my push, I'll work harder.
Right.
And I'm thinking, really? Are you ribbing me now? Are you really serious? Because if you're really serious, I'm thinking now the thought bubble over my head, I want to do all I can to get your ass out of here.
Right.
We don't need that shit. So, and so I knew Mick from, I watched him a lot in Dallas working for the Von Erichs and others, because the Von Erichs television came into Oklahoma on regular cable every Saturday night. I think it was Saturday nights, yeah. And so I had a feel for the guy, and then myself and others that had a vested interest in his success, we brought him to Atlanta to WCW, where I got to know him very well. And you just saw a guy with high character. He had integrity. He was going to be on time. He was going to work his ass off, and he wasn't popping pills.
Right.
He wasn't walking around like an amoeba. Hey, bro. God, just that was an era where I'd like to forget all of it, because of this seeing guys that were not prepared to handle success.
Right.
Were not prepared to handle the money they were making, and they thought the money trail and the goose that laid the golden egg was never going to fly away. And I think Mick was very conservative with his money. He wasn't living high on the hog, as they say in Oklahoma and Alabama. So I knew the kind of character that he was. Not a TV character, but a human being, maybe better said. So that was how that came about. And then when I went to Vince, he said, well, I had some ideas and some guys I'd like for us to consider. And I mentioned Mick, and he said, oh, no, ain't going to work. He's tried out. So he asked somebody, I don't know who he asked. He might have asked Bruce or Patterson or somebody, whoever was there. And he, how many times he tried out here? Oh, 3. So I'm thinking, well, maybe you geniuses made a mistake.
Right.
I know that you invented wrestling, and all of you got a vested interest in the extreme knowledge that you have that's extremely higher than mine or anybody that I know. So, but I don't get it. So I asked him, I said, well, if you want me to do this job, you got to give me the chance to do the job. And so that was from the famous, I think I wrote in Slobberknocker, or maybe Under the Black Hat, that, you need to know, JR, what it feels like to have a talent break your heart. Because you're really emotionally invested in this guy. You want to bring him in. I can see you're very serious, almost hell-bent on this. But you need to understand what it's like to have a talent break your heart, because he's not going to be successful. Okay. And so he said, what's your idea to do with him? I said, well, here's the deal. We have a 7-foot baby face.
Yes.
And he ain't changing. He ain't turning to be a heel. He's already had that run. And you wouldn't screw with that deal. We're talking about Taker.
Right.
And I used the analogy. I said, Vince, in using NBA parlance, which I had to tell them that meant the National Basketball Association. Oh yeah, he didn't watch it, but I just try to use an illustration.
Right.
When the Lakers had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, they had the most dominant inside player in the game. And to have a chance, if you're in the Western Division, to get out of their way and make it to the playoffs, or deep in the playoffs, or play for championships, you got to figure out some way to defend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So you got to match up with somebody. And that's kind of how I looked at this deal. We needed a dancing partner for The Undertaker until we got somebody else ready. And we didn't have anybody ready at that point in time, in my view. So that was kind of the dialogue that went into that deal. So, but I'm so glad that Vince acquiesced and saw a different light on Mick, and then he had that Hall of Fame run, and it's been great ever since.
Talk to me a little bit about upper management. You said a minute ago, you know, we heard from upper management that they didn't have any faith or confidence in him, or whatever the phrase you used was. Is that just Vince, or is that Vince and Bruce? Is it Vince, Bruce, and Russo? I mean, who is sort of pushing back on your insistence that this guy can be a player?
Primarily Vince, but when you see how things work, and then maybe they've changed now, I don't know, but the whoever's in the room in any meeting would take the pulse of the old man before they would declare. So I always thought that was horse shit.
Right.
That's one of those deals where their testicles really would not fit into a thimble. You'd have plenty of room. And you know, come on, drop your set, let's go. And I've told Vince that in private many times. So, you know, it's funny to me how so-and-so said this in this meeting. And just yesterday, he and I were talking about this very topic. And he had a completely different view on it. But he waited to hear what you had to say so he wouldn't cross the boss.
Right.
Or be perceived in that way. Insecurity. And so Vince is primarily the guy that he just didn't believe that Mick would get over. And so I told him my plan with Taker, and I said, hell, if nothing else, we shoot an angle on television. He's a good talker, and we get him to we get a run with him. We get around we're doing house shows, Conrad. We needed main events.
Right.
So it gave us a fresh match. And I also knew that Taker and, as he called him, Jack, Cactus Jack, Taker and Jack had great respect for each other because they had worked in those little shitholes and those small houses in Dallas. Not Dallas is a shithole, but there was times when that territory really dipped.
Yeah.
You know, they couldn't have the Von Erichs and the Freebirds forever. And then when the Von Erich Freebird thing ended and the Von Erich situation continued to be very sketchy, you know, personally, the boys, they had nobody ready. So it was a tough place to work, but they went through that, did Taker and Mick. So I believe that he had something. It was a feeling. It was an instinctual feeling. I thought, well, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And Vince could say, I told you so. I told you he's going to break your heart because you're going to fire him now. And that's what would have happened. He would have said, JR, I'm done with him. Give him his notice today. Okay. So that's kind of how that worked. But basically it was Vince leading the charge. And I don't think Bruce or Pat had any significant issues with Mick Foley whatsoever. But they certainly were not going to cross. They weren't going to die on the hill of Mick Foley to cross the boss.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.